Baltimore is a vibrant and diverse city known for its revitalized Harborfront District. Just 40 miles from the nation's capital, the city of neighborhoods is filled with historic monuments and home to Johns Hopkins University. But it's also a town plagued by a history of violent crime. And in 2017, a high-profile shooting would put a strained relationship between residents and law enforcement to the test. The city of Baltimore has a rich history that goes back over 2 centuries.
Baltimore in the 19th century was one of the richest cities in the country because we had a thriving port.
But by 1975, the port, along with the rest of Baltimore, had fallen into disrepair. So a group of investors met to brainstorm ways to reinvigorate the economy. From that meeting, a new nickname was coined, Charm City.
Baltimore underwent a revitalization of the inner harbor, and that was done in hopes of attracting more tourists.
You have a mix of young people out of college who are employed by a number of different companies here that have kind of taken the place of the old blue collar.
You go down to that waterfront and it's like no other in the country. It's beautiful. That's not Baltimore that a lot of people, including my brother and me, grew up in.
For all its charm, Baltimore has long been synonymous with crime. And the city got a deadly reminder of that fact on July 2nd, 2017. Around 8 p.m., Baltimore police received a 911 call about a fatal shooting on the west side.
Hello? This is Baltimore City 911. Yeah, can you please get the police to park out evidence? My son said somebody murdered in the room.
Officers are immediately dispatched to the address.
Argyle is in the Central District. It's off of Pennsylvania Avenue, which is a main thoroughfare. It's a row home. There wasn't really anybody out at this particular corner because there's a bunch of vacant homes and a vacant lot. When I went into the house, we walked around and I immediately saw the victim on the ground. He was obviously deceased from a gunshot wound to the head.
Unfortunately, this kind of violence has become an all too common sight for police. But this time, the victim is someone they know.
July 2nd, I went and met with a buddy of mine down in Anne Arundel County and got a half a bushel of crabs. I'm coming back home and I'm pulling up in the driveway and I get a text on my cell phone. It's the thread that I had seen way too many times. And it's a formula, basically. It's a format, I should say, of the date, time, location, what. And reading it, and I see Deanna Smith. And it said, laid in a pool of blood. I called the district commander who was on scene of the homicide. And I said, my brother's name is Deanna Smith.
The Baltimore where Deon Smith was raised isn't somewhere tourists often go.
Deon Smith was 9 years old when he was sent to live with his father in West Baltimore. And when he arrived, it was very much like it is somewhat today. It was plagued with drugs and violence.
Baltimore has definitely become synonymous with crime. It's ranked number 3 in the country for having one of the highest crime rates.
We grew up in poverty, so we was forced to grow ahead of our time, and you see things that you're not supposed to see.
But Deon had something a lot of boys his age did not have. Positive role models.
Deon's situation was actually somewhat better than some of the people I've covered in West Baltimore in that T.J. Smith, his brother, really put the effort in to try to help him as many ways as possible.
I'll tell them, I don't care if you're not doing anything. It's people out here that are. And you can easily be lumped in and be part of this.
However, that didn't stop Deon from falling prey to the same problems as the rest of his peers.
I think his first job was as a lookout for some drug dealers in West Baltimore. And he'd say, time out, when the police was coming down the block. They paid him, I think, $30 a day to do that.
He wasn't a tough guy. That wasn't him. He wasn't gonna hurt anybody. He was just a kid who certainly was easily influenced by the environment.
But all of that changed in his 20s when Dion started a family of his own.
I remember going for my sonogram visit, and then they pointed out twins, and that just changed everything.
He was like, I'm gonna be a dad, I'm gonna be a dad. Just so excited.
He was happy, but confused. I guess he felt like he was going into adulthood.
He would call me and say, he just wanted to do right for his kids. That became the transition. That was the light switch. I want to do right for my kids.
Dion stopped hanging out on the corners and joined an outreach program for people trying to straighten out their lives. Afterward, he began working for the organization as a mentor.
He was starting to give back and trying to help kids who had gone through the same thing that he had endured.
I just love that person he became. That working man, about to be father. That was Dion.
Life is life, Dion. Remember that. It ain't always bad.
But before he had a chance to raise his own children, 24-year-old Dion Smith was gunned down. And both the police and his West Baltimore community want to know why.
You should never go into an investigation with any type of predisposed idea. You go into an investigation with a clean slate and you build a case based on the evidence.
We have so many cases that are whodunit, but the first part of the whodunit is what happened, how it happened.
After securing the crime scene, homicide investigators begin searching for any clues the killer may have left behind.
They see a young man who's been shot in the head, but also they see that his pants pockets have been turned inside out. And that would indicate to investigators that perhaps this had been a robbery.
The door was unlocked, which gave me the idea that he let this person into his apartment. And that person was probably looking for something because there was some things overturned.
However, other details convinced police this wasn't a robbery.
It didn't have anything that you would really go rob, as in you wouldn't go there to steal jewelry, you wouldn't go there to steal money or video games. This looked to me to be more personal.
The very nature of the wounds itself, a shotgun blast to the head, that could have been a planned execution.
A lot of times law enforcement, and I think specifically in a city like Baltimore, there is a natural assumption or leap that when crimes are committed, it's drug-related.
Gun violence in terms of drug organizations exists when drug debts are not paid. It exists when drugs or stashes are stolen from one drug dealer to the next. It exists when corners are occupied by the wrong drug organization.
But according to Dion's loved ones, he'd gotten out of that life years ago, and everyone in the neighborhood knew it.
He didn't really, enjoy running with the bad crowd. He's just caught up in the peer pressure.
When he found out that he having the babies and the babies were coming, and he's like, okay, I need to get another job. He just didn't really have time to be outside trying to be a drug dealer at that time. After that, it was, okay, I got good money coming in now. I'm not risking my life for it, my freedom for it.
There was no signs of like, hey, this is a cut house. There was nothing to indicate that Mr. Smith was in any way selling drugs out of that apartment at all.
So if this wasn't a robbery or a drug-related shooting, then what did happen? Many areas in Baltimore have been ravaged by the war on drugs, and the west side of the city, where Dion Smith grew up, was hit harder than most.
People talk about Baltimore as a tale of two cities, and what they mean by that normally is in terms of the socioeconomic divides.
I know other cities in America are like this, but you can go from dirt poor to seven-figure homes within a few minutes of one another.
But it wasn't always that way.
West Baltimore is historically rich. The North Avenue, Pennsylvania Avenue corridor, there's a lot of historic homes around Reservoir Hill and the like where African Americans settled.
What really, for Baltimore, marked a turning point, I think, was in 1906, when the city was one of the first in the country to codify segregation and pass a law that said that African Americans could not live in certain neighborhoods.
The lines of demarcation, they still exist, but they don't exist. They're there, but the way they are demarcated is by income.
And it's West Baltimore. And, you know, you can go outside right now and you can see these guys out here hustling. You can go up on maybe 2 or 3 corners and you see them hustling.
The block I grew up on, oddly enough, I felt safe growing up there when I was younger. Since the 2000s, things have changed. The violence that we're seeing right now in Baltimore is a different type of violence. It seems so indiscriminate.
By July 2017, there had already been 173 murders, and TJ's brother Dion had now become the latest.
The majority of the shooting deaths are black men between the ages of 25 and 29. And the majority of those black men have either been incarcerated or have been involved in some form of violence. People almost develop a nonchalant attitude because it's become so commonplace that people don't even respond to it when they hear about a murder.
But that wasn't the case for Dion's family and friends.
I wrote down pretty bad. He's, kissing our sons goodbye. He's going to see them the next day. And then it's like, well, you can't bring them back.
Investigators have been told that Dion hadn't been involved in the drug trade since he became a father. However, Dion's arrest record indicates that he did have other run-ins with the law.
TJ had helped him get a job at cricket and kind of gave him what he hoped to be, what he needed to get to the next level. And it seemed like it was going well, but then it turns out, unfortunately, that he was fraudulently or faking receipts and was then accused of taking $7,000 from the till. And I think that was a big disappointment.
He made some bad decisions. Absolutely, he made some bad decisions.
He was concerned because of his past and knowing that he had a past record and that this was for a felony amount of money. He was concerned that he was going to go and do real prison time.
Could the pressure to provide for his children have gotten Dion involved in something more dangerous? His brother TJ doesn't think so.
I remember him coming to me and we talking about it, and he was petrified, which was music to my ears. Like, okay, let's line up what you need to do. You need to make things right with the situation that took place, first of all. You need to handle a job and maintain a job and show that you have responsibility.
My understanding is that he seemed to be making progress and had made, sort of a commitment not to fall back into any of the problems he had before.
We're going to break this cycle. We have to. Got to break this cycle. And remember, he was getting prepared for a job interview, and we went and got him some clothes, khakis, shirt, shoes, tie, belt, the whole nine. Get him ready. I remember when I told him, I said it's going to work out. And I actually picked him up from court that day.
He didn't know it was the last time he'd see Dion alive. And as the hunt for his killer continues, residents of West Baltimore wonder.
If a police officer's brother or family isn't safe, I just don't know what else to say about a city.
It reaffirmed the narrative that none of us Not a single one of us is immune to this violence.
In 2015, Baltimore had a huge surge in violent crime after the controversial death of Freddie Gray. Freddie Gray was arrested for possession of a knife, and he fell into a coma and died while in custody.
As a result, 4 officers were charged with police brutality. When the officers were eventually acquitted, it drove a wedge even further between the police and the community. Detectives in West Baltimore are investigating the murder of 24-year-old Deon Smith, the younger brother of the department's well-known spokesman, TJ Smith.
Normally, a spokesperson for Baltimore City Police would not be that big a deal in a community because you only see them every once in a while. But because violence and crime is so front and center with the media, TJ is a pretty big personality. He was on par with the mayor or other critical people because he was always front and center.
When I took on the role to be the spokesperson for the Baltimore, I'm taking on people. I'm taking on the community. So when you're given such a bully pulpit, I want to make sure I deliver a message of how you can engage to make sure you're not the next person whose door we're going to knock on.
Unfortunately, the strained relationship between residents and law enforcement means that few are willing to talk.
Relationships between the police and the residents is crucial and plays a big portion in the success of an investigation. Because in a city like Baltimore, Baltimore is known for having a snitches get stitches mentality, which means that a lot of the residents are not comfortable with coming forth with information.
Decades of aggressive policing, police brutality, zero tolerance policing has created a very fraught community.
I could see it in the faces of the people who I would interact with. There was always a sense of suspicion.
So how do you solve an investigation when you have an entire community that may be aware of what happened, but they're afraid to discuss it out of fear?
But Deon's family seems to already have their suspicions about one of their own. Deon's cousin Imani, who's been living in his apartment.
Deon and Imani was like really close cousins. Basically, whenever you came over, you always saw Imani.
Like Deon, Imani had a troubled past, so Deon had taken him under his wing, like some of the other boys he had mentored.
Imani wasn't working at the time. He had acquired these felonies where it stunted his ability to just do an application and get a job. He would come home and go back, come home and go back. They would clean his record. He'd throw everything out if you complete this period of probation, and he would do it and then get in trouble again. And he allowed Imani to stay with him, being helpful again, giving of himself again. And they were somewhat like salt and pepper.
But instead of being grateful, Imani seemed resentful of Deon's help.
September 28th, 2009, I remember that day. My uncle passed away, and in his will, he didn't leave anything for my cousin, his son, because he wasn't there when my uncle needed him most and things like that. In the will, my uncle left everything to my dad, but my dad didn't want nothing to do with the house. So, just gave it to my brother. And so my brother had the keys and everything. So that right there probably had some jealousy and things going on with that.
Deon and Imani moved into one of the apartments in the building, and Deon took over landlord duties. However, he seemed completely unaware that his cousin harbored any ill will towards him.
He went to my cousin, of course, because why not? We're family. That was your dad, you're my cousin, let's do this together. They started fixing up things a little bit in there, got it good to go, started renting out some apartments in there. He put a camera up just for security reasons because it's an apartment building. And you want to know who's coming in and out of the building. And I'm thinking my cousins started seeing okay, we got money coming in and stuff like that. And Dion had rules and stuff too, and Dion was the only one with the keys. That's when things probably went left with them, because you got the youngest person in charge and you a grown man, you're gonna feel some type of way.
And after Dion was shot, the family observed Imani acting rather strangely.
It was just like he just pretended that he didn't know what happened. He went in the house for me and grabbed a few of Dion's belongings and he gave it to me. But he never said like, I'm sorry, or cried with me, or even hugged me or anything like that.
When Imani came to my house and I asked him what happened, and he treated it as if we're talking about the neighbor up the street or the guy around the corner. I don't know anything. I don't know. I say, Imani, you with Dion all the time.
Dion's sister became convinced Imani had something to do with her brother's death.
That night, when I went to my dad's house, like I stood over top of him as if like I was a boxer or something. Like, what's going on? Where were you when Dion was killed? And he wouldn't say nothing. I was ready to swing. TJ pulled me up and I went into the other room, and he was my number one suspect.
The next morning, Dion's father became suspicious as well.
I came from my room. He stepped in the living room area. He says, they going in the house all night. They going in the house all night. And he kind of talks in circles. And what were you talking about? They went in the house.
Imani had been watching investigators at the scene through the apartment building's surveillance camera by using an app on his cell phone.
He taps right into the video camera in the building, and he watched the activity all through the night. It appeared that he didn't even go to sleep because his phone didn't have any charge. I said, well, Imani, you know, you're not going to be able to stay with me. I mean, I'm frankly speaking, I can't trust him.
But was spying on investigators proof that Imani killed Dion?
If you read a person, you could tell their demeanor and things like that. And that whole aura that he had, I was not feeling it. He could not make eye contact with me for nothing.
I think a really good investigator, if you are determined, you turn over every rock, because somebody usually will get some type of point of guilt or consciousness where they want to help with the investigation.
West Baltimore was historically the economic and cultural center of the city's black community. But economic hardship and the drug trade have left row houses empty, and half the families living there in poverty as the neighborhood crumbles around them. As residents deal with violent crime, robbery, and a murder rate 10 times the national average in 2017, many feel that the city doesn't even care.
1/3 of the murders that take place in Baltimore happen in about 5 square miles of the city. What's another person dying in this neighborhood where people already died? What's another vacant home in this community that already has 20, 30, 40 of them?
As a result, police have become used to dealing with the lack of eyewitness testimony, even when crimes take place in public places.
It absolutely is a damned if you do and damned if you don't mentality.
But with Dion Smith's murder, that wouldn't be a problem.
As investigators start to broaden their search for evidence, they catch a lucky break because just in the lobby area of this apartment building, there's a surveillance camera.
There's so many cases with nobody around, no cameras, no videos, no DNA, as opposed to now with Dion, we have something to sink our teeth into.
Once detectives gain access to the recordings, they begin poring over hours of footage, looking for the shooter.
There was no way out the back. You could only come into this place from the front. You could only leave from the front. I knew what the victim looked like. I could see when he came in. And we were also getting the other neighbors. So we're beginning to put the faces to all the players of going past the video.
A short while before Dion was murdered, investigators spot a young man acting suspiciously. And it's not Dion's cousin, Imani.
Eventually, watching the same video, we were able to see the suspect come and the suspect go. And he was the one that was not fitting into the neighbor. This one person we kept on seeing over and over.
And you see the suspect in and out of the house. You know, my brother walking right past him. No issues.
To investigators, it looks like the man is waiting for an opportunity.
There is a sense of foreboding when you watch the video itself, especially knowing what happened later on.
In and out all day long and basically waiting on him like predator and prey.
And then the moment arrives.
You could see a shotgun come out of a bag.
The suspect climbs the stairs to Dion's apartment. Then a few moments later, he runs back out.
We never see the actual shooting, but at this point, he's the only person that could be responsible.
That video was critical because that video put a suspect at the scene at the time of the murder.
None of the other residents can or will tell police who the man is. So investigators enlist the aid of local media. Surprisingly, the move pays off.
If you are fortunate enough to have video surveillance and you're able to share it with the public through the media, I've seen many times where you've been able to solve a case because somebody saw the video and they saw something specific.
As TJ reported on this 173rd murder, it really struck to the core of the violence within the Baltimore City. And rather than people doing what they're very much accustomed to doing, such as not reporting crimes, so-called not snitching, TJ's response garnered an outpouring of support from the community, which caused the phone lines to light up.
They receive several tips that the man they're looking for is 21-year-old Terrell Gibson.
Terrell Gibson was 3 years younger than Dion, and Dion and Terrell knew each other growing up in West Baltimore.
Terrell was a childhood friend of ours. He came from a broken home, so he was in foster care, and he was picked on and stuff.
Terrell Gibson was like, in a sense, a mirror image of Dion. You see many kids like this in Baltimore that, just don't have anything to begin with. And, he had been involved in the drug trade.
Terrell had many run-ins with the criminal justice system. Drug charges, assault charges. So you're talking about a young man who had a lot of trouble. Certainly more trouble than Dion had gotten into himself.
The year Terrell spent in jail was for stabbing someone on the bus. He'd just been released the previous December.
I think he was released into a world that frankly didn't really want him. And so I think you learn that there was a lot going on with this young man that could have suggested he was capable of this crime.
Terrell and Dion had been close throughout their teenage years, but had a falling out after Dion became a father.
He did cut some of the friends off that he was hanging with. He stopped smoking weed and stuff like that.
At some point, Terrell started to get on Dion's nerve because he would call while we're out with our sons. I could feel like something probably was going on with them at the time. But they're boys, you know how guys are, they get over it.
However, police have no doubt that Terrell is the man carrying the shotgun in that video.
He's the right size, shape, build as what's on that video. This is a match, a physical match as to what we see.
You can compare with physical characteristics, whether it's height, weight, tattoos, hairstyles, the walk. the gait of the person, because everybody's walk is different.
We did some photographic lineups from different witnesses and then also identified Terrell as being that person.
So, what could have happened to make Terrell want to kill his childhood friend?
The justice system is broken in the beginning as well as the end. When you incarcerate somebody and you put them in prison and you don't have programs to prepare them once they're released to be able to go back and return to the community. If you're not providing systems to help change, shift the consciousness where they can return to the communities as better men and women, it's a broken system.
When criminals released straight back onto the Baltimore streets commit more crimes, who is to blame? Police in West Baltimore have a suspect in the murder of 24-year-old Deon Smith, his former childhood friend, Terrell Gibson. Terrell has a record of violent crime and was released from prison less than a year before the shooting.
Once they had the video evidence of Terrell Gibson at the location of the murder, at the time of the murder, I think that put Terrell front and center in the case.
He was charged with attempt murder before he actually got out of jail and killed my brother. I felt like the system kind of failed us too, because how you let someone that was locked up as a juvenile come straight out of the system as an adult who doesn't have any mindset of like what you're going to do.
I think he was a classic case of someone who had been involved in violence early on and someone who probably was capable of committing a violent act. And I think that also made the case quite strong against him.
Investigators quickly moved to arrest Terrell.
On July 6th of 2017, our WATF, which is a warrant apprehension task force, located the suspect near crime scene and arrested him without incident. He was brought down to our office, which is the homicide office, and he was read his Miranda rights.
But when police questioned Terrell, he denies everything.
You want to talk to me? You don't want to talk? I ain't trying to self-incriminate myself. I wasn't even told I was running it for questioning.
Even though they can place him at the scene of the crime, detectives know the lack of direct evidence could cause difficulties in court.
The video surveillance is in fact great evidence to have, but it's no slam dunk because for one, that's all they had. And they had the video, but they never found a weapon. They never found a weapon, and there was never a witness that could identify the shooter.
So, investigators review all the security footage again, looking for additional details that might improve their case. Terrell can be seen entering and exiting the building several times during the day. And on one of those occasions, he interacts with another young man.
You see the two men walking in. One of their faces is covered. It seems like they are kind of waiting for something. It's not like someone walking into a hallway. There's a little bit of hesitation, which could be viewed as premeditation or preparing for something that they're about to do.
The second man hands Terrell a black bag, the same bag Terrell takes the shotgun out of a short time later. Deon's family members are able to ID the apparent accomplice.
My cousin Imani, he was standing in the hallway with Terrell Gibson. Once he handed Terrell that black bag, Imani ran out the house. Like, he knew exactly what was going to happen.
When detectives confront Imani, he finally agrees to come clean. From his statement, police are able to put together a clearer picture of what led to Deon's murder.
Imani and Terrell, they don't have jobs, so their job was drugs. That's how them two became friends.
It appears that they went in together to do a drug deal. And it appears that there was some misunderstanding about the drugs, or perhaps Terrell decided he was going to just take all the drugs.
Word on the street was Terrell and Imani, they were actually arguing up on North Avenue about something coming up missing and stuff like that. And again, that's when Deon's name got into it.
So I think that Imani and Terrell might have said, we'll just blame it on him and deal with it that way.
The two men went back to the apartment to wait for Deon. But it's unclear whether Imani knew what Terrell intended to do.
My cousin, he just snapped on not being the killer, but if you were there, you're just as guilty. You're just as guilty. He knew something was getting ready to go down because he got out that house so fast. The fact that you couldn't warn your own cousin, couldn't protect your own cousin. You had something to do with this. It was just very selfish. Very selfish.
Instead of charging Imani with accessory to murder, prosecutors offer him a deal in exchange for his testimony.
Okay. And who was that person? That's Terrell. And what did Terrell do in this whole kill my cousin? He killed your cousin? Okay.
They grabbed Imani up, took him into protective custody. He was there for 2 months with them before we went to trial.
I'm excited because all I know is that Imani is in witness protection and he's going to testify during the trial. And that's when we get to hear what happened and, we really get to hear the story.
In 2017, there were 343 murders in Baltimore, the second highest in 15 years. Deon Smith was number 173. But his connection to the Baltimore City Police put the case front and center in the media.
What we've experienced the last 5 years seems to have busted out of the seams of what you're used to violence being.
The fact that his brother was a police officer definitely gave him an edge. I hate to say that it was treated any differently, but it probably did make him a little bit more aggressive in solving the crime.
21-year-old Terrell Gibson has been charged with the crime. And the fact that prosecutors have Deon's cousin Imani as an eyewitness makes them confident they will get a conviction.
I thought that he would be the key to exactly what's going on and really be able to tell the part and why Terrell Gibson did what he did.
But then, less than 2 days before the trial is set to begin, Imani suddenly disappears.
He left protective custody, and we haven't heard or seen from him since.
It was like, well, why did you even go into witness protection in the first place? It just didn't make sense.
I think what most people don't understand is that in a city like Baltimore that has such a high crime level, they're not even comfortable with being involved in a witness protection program, because what happens after the trial is over with? You're putting them back into the cesspool opportunity where 9 times out of 10, something's going to happen. They're going to be retaliated against.
In September of 2018, Terrell Gibson shows up in court looking more like a student than a drug dealer.
It was very hard to see Terrell Gibson in that courtroom, especially when he's 2 feet away from you and my dad sitting beside me.
Guy that didn't wear glasses. Now he wearing glasses. I guess that's a look of humility. He'll wear the necktie and dress neat, but the glasses was an add-on.
He pleads not guilty. Without Imani, prosecutors are forced to rely solely on the security camera footage to prove otherwise.
Based on the evidence that the investigators were able to produce for the prosecutors, the state's theory was Terrell was the sole perpetrator of this murder. You have time, you have the date, and you have what clearly looks like the murder weapon. And that's based on the testimony of the forensic doctors who said the cause of death and what he was likely shot with. About as good as it gets for circumstantial evidence.
They believe the shooting was a premeditated act carried out to cover for a bad drug deal. And the fact that Terrell had been willing to kill his friend even after Dion had tried to help him get back on his feet made his crime even more egregious.
The prosecutor said during the trial, during opening remarks, said, he's a monster. This is a monstrous act, and he's a monster.
But the defense argues that the state can't prove Terrell is the one who pulled the trigger.
The video surveillance merely shows Terrell running out of the building and placing the pistol grip shotgun into his waistband. It does not show him actually shooting Dion.
Just because someone's sitting in a hall under a video camera doesn't necessarily mean they went in and shot somebody.
There were no eyewitnesses to this murder.
But what would the jury believe?
Every jury wants to hear a motive. That's key. And there was no clear motive that anybody could articulate as a witness as to why Terrell, who grew up with Dion, would have wanted to kill Dion.
After 5 days of deliberation, the jury renders its verdict.
Guilty, first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life, suspend all but 65 years. And then he was given a subsequent 20-year sentence.
When the verdict came guilty, everyone on my family side was just excited, sad, tears of joy, tears of sadness because we're here crying because you're gone, but we're here crying because we got justice for your life.
But Imani remains missing to this day.
He's nowhere to be found. He would be the key to exactly what's going on and really be able to tell why Terrell Gibson did what he did. But I know wherever he's at, he's looking over his shoulder. Paranoid.
While Dion Smith's killer may have been brought to justice, violent crime in the city of Baltimore remains a problem with no easy solution.
We look at Baltimore and we look at where this violence is really prolific. And it's been that way for many, 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 many years. And it's generation after generation that are seeing the exact same thing. And really it comes from the lack of investment into people, into the environments that they're in.
What we try to do with these kids in here is give them a fighting chance. I'm a hope dealer. I deal in hope because I see what a lot of people don't see in these kids.
At the end of the day, all I want is for more young men, especially in our city, young black men, to be able to grow up with their children and the children to be able to grow up with their father.
TJ fought a tremendous battle to save his brother Dion from the violence that plagues the streets of West Baltimore. But TJ lost that battle. And he lost that battle, but the war, it rages on.
Oakland, California, with its sunny skies and mild weather, is often called the bright side of the bay. Home to over 400,000 residents, the city is one of the most diverse in the nation. But the city also has a dark side. And in 2007, Oakland's violence leapt off the front pages when a prominent reporter was gunned down in broad daylight. Oakland is the third largest city in the Bay Area and has been voted one of the most exciting places to live in the United States.
Oakland has so many wonderful attributes. It has spectacular neighborhoods. It has spectacular people in it.
Oakland is a mecca in everything you can think of. We're a mecca in the sports industry. We're a mecca in music production. We're a mecca in arts.
But Oakland also has a very different kind of reputation.
Oakland has a dark side, ranking amongst the most dangerous cities in California.
In the 1980s, Oakland became well known for the crack epidemic. Our all-out gang warfare, murders on the street, drove us to the #1 violent city in the state of California.
In spite of that, the residents of Oakland remain fiercely proud of their history, especially those in the Black community.
We have a sense of pride here in this city that's not matched by anyone.
Oakland has always had such a strong history, from the Panthers to the Black businesses here to gospel.
African American history here in Oakland is deep, rich, varied, and it goes way back to the Transcontinental Railroad. Its terminus was here in Oakland, not in San Francisco. And a lot of African Americans who worked the railroad settled in what is West Oakland today.
But even in a tight-knit community like Oakland, contentions can form. And on August 2nd, 2007, a brutal crime would send shockwaves through the city. For the residents of Oakland, it begins like any other workday, with a busy morning commute.
It was a sunny, warm morning. There were lots of people out, lots of vehicular traffic, people going to and from work. And then there was just the actual foot traffic.
But around 7:30 a.m., this relatively peaceful routine suddenly erupts into violence.
You know, a man just got his cup of coffee. He's walking to work. Somebody pulls up in a white van, gets out the ski mask with a shotgun.
He saw a guy in black run across the street with a shotgun, and the guy shot him. And when he fell, he rolled over, and then they shot him in the face.
I couldn't believe that it happened in the manner that it did. It was something out of a movie.
Witnesses immediately call 911, and police and paramedics arrive minutes later. But it's far too late to save the victim.
He was pronounced dead on the scene.
It's a scene that has become all too common. But this time, the victim is someone everyone knows. A beloved journalist named Chauncey Bailey.
When I arrived at the scene, Chauncey Bailey had already been pronounced deceased, so therefore his body was not transported to a hospital. He was just covered with a tarp, awaiting the arrival of the Alameda County Coroner's Office to recover his body. The area that Chauncey Bailey was shot is 14th Street in downtown Oakland. Major thoroughfare, many individuals who are coming and going to work. Because it was broad daylight, early morning hours, there were multiple witnesses, onlookers, and people in disbelief as word spread that Chauncey Bailey had been killed.
You couldn't think of why did it happen. And I didn't get it, and we were just in shock.
Mr. Bailey's office, the Oakland Post, was just a block and a half away. In the opposite direction was the McDonald's, and then just beyond the McDonald's was the county courthouse. So this took place in view of the county courthouse.
For Chauncey Bailey, this iconic investigative journalist, to be murdered, it really puts you in a high-pressure situation because you want to solve it, because he was so beloved to the people of Oakland.
Chauncey Bailey was born and raised in Oakland. Chauncey's love of language eventually led him to pursue journalism. After graduating from San Jose University, he worked in Connecticut, Chicago, and Detroit before eventually returning home to work as a cub reporter for the Oakland Post.
The Oakland Post is one of our leading papers out here, especially for the black community. He was the classic reporter, the one that would get the whole story before he let you know about it.
He came from the old school of hard knocks, shoe leather reporting newspapers, and would ask the tough questions.
Chauncey immediately stood out among his peers, not only for his writing, but for his personality as well.
Chauncey was dapper. He always wore suits. He was charming. He was funny. He had a great sense of humor. He was witty. He was a very personable, very likable, and a very intriguing person.
He was a wonderful storyteller, which is what made Chauncey the reporter that he was.
Chauncey was very passionate. He was someone who cared a lot about the black community, had strong opinions about black empowerment and business.
Over the next few years, Chauncey honed his craft, working as a print and TV news reporter. His platform grew even larger in the 1990s when he became a familiar face on the Soul Beat TV network.
Soul Beat was a 24-hour black-owned television network. It traditionally played music videos, and then it also did interviews.
Soul Beat was awesome. Soul Beat was a thing on cable television. And it was a guy who lived here in the city. They did a lot of incredibly awesome music off of Higginberger Road, which is kind of a pretty famous road here in Oakland.
Chauncey was the news director for Soul Beat.
Oh, Chauncey Bailey from Soul Beat.
Chauncey developed a 1-hour news show, and it was pertinent to the black community because he would deliver a lot of news that wasn't on your local news.
He would do stories about black women and their efforts to start businesses. He would do stories about young men who were overcoming obstacles. He would also do good stories when Black History Month or other things came up. He would do cultural stories.
He was basically telling stories on the newscast that was ignored by other news outlets.
Chauncey's programs would turn Soul Beat into an integral part of the community.
Soul Beat used to find lost children. Like, people would actually call the news program and speak to one of the anchors and say, hey, my daughter's been missing for a couple of days. I'm looking for her. I'm worried about her, and called the police. They said they're keeping an eye out for her. And 10 minutes later, somebody would call and go, hey, you looking for Renika? Oh, she next door at such and such house. I'm going to tell her you looking for her. One of the stories was this woman, she was about to be homeless. She had 8 kids, and Chauncey interviewed her. And 10 minutes later, somebody called and said, well, I got this apartment building. I got an apartment. Tell her to give me a call, and we'll make something happen. That was the beauty of Soul Beat.
When Chauncey finally slowed down long enough to start a family, he passed his love of journalism on to his son.
One of the things I really remember about Chauncey was his son, Quincy, who he used to bring into the newsroom and he was very proud of. And he was a kid who sort of grew up before our eyes in the newsroom.
Chauncey's like, I don't care if my son doesn't do anything else, but he's gotta read. I think his son was reading by the time he was 3.
Although the marriage didn't last, Chauncey and his son remained close. And in 2005, Chauncey's career came full circle when he returned to the Oakland Post, this time as editor-in-chief.
Chauncey was like the perfect person to take that job. He really added a lot of experience and depth to that publication at a really important time.
It was a real dope paper. He would do stories that was really important to the community.
Now, just 2 months later, Chauncey has been gunned down in broad daylight, and Oakland police want to know why.
This had been the first time in a very long time that a U.S. journalist was actually killed on U.S. soil. So the level of importance in solving this case, the level of bringing closure and offering answers was paramount.
For those who live and work in Oakland, California, gun violence is a harsh reality.
Oakland, like many urban centers, has its struggles and its challenges. He obviously was known for having lots of crime. It was affected deeply by the drug trade in the 90s.
The high level of violence during the crack epidemic has given Oakland a reputation that has been very hard for us to shake.
In this case with Mr. Bailey, he was an investigative journalist. But because he was so admired and so loved by the community, that it definitely did put a lot of pressure on the police to find the culprits.
On the southeast sidewalk, he was laying next to some shrubbery. He had been carrying a newspaper. I think that was found in his possession.
The response from local media is just as swift once they discover they've lost one of their own.
If I wasn't the first reporter down there on the scene, I was certainly among the very first. I quickly was able to find out from one of the investigating and responding officers who it was. And that was shocking for me. My God, it's somebody who I knew.
I remember seeing his feet out, and the blanket wasn't covering his feet. It was above his waist, and he was covered all the way up. I sat there in my bed looking at the news, and I was just stunned because I couldn't believe it.
I was like, Chauncey? But I just talked to Chauncey a couple of days ago. We were supposed to be meeting this week.
Fortunately, it isn't difficult to find witnesses who are able to describe what happened.
There were many people that saw Mr. Bailey get off of the AC Transit public bus and go into the McDonald's.
Chauncey would go there, get his coffee, and then walk to work. That was his routine. You know, you could set your watch by it.
He may have given a cup of coffee or bought a breakfast burrito for a couple of homeless guys sleeping on the bench. Some mixed news about that, but that was my impression. And he's walking along 14th, and he gets to the corner of Alice.
Eyewitnesses say that's when a man wearing a ski mask walked straight towards Chauncey and then shot him. Chauncey's wallet and personal belongings weren't taken, so it doesn't appear to be a robbery.
There wasn't the taking of jewelry. There wasn't the taking of his wallet or credit cards or even an expensive cell phone. None of that was taken. So that's an indicator to the police that this was not about robbery. This had another motive to it.
The gunman used a shotgun to kill Mr. Bailey, shooting the gun upwards to 3 times, depending on the individuals that you talk to. I know for a fact that he was hit twice. The last one, execution style, as he lay on the ground, already suffering from 1 gunshot wound.
My first thought was that it was probably something personal and not professional, because journalists don't tend to just get shot in the street in the United States.
But according to his colleagues, Chauncey seemed to have more friends than enemies.
Chauncey was a bit of a man about town. He got around, and he was a social animal as well. So he would go to many events, pressers in the afternoon, social things at night, and he had many casual acquaintances.
Chauncey Bailey had an infectious personality. He was very talkative with everyone, men and women.
He also appeared to be on good terms with his ex-wife, despite frustration over their custody arrangement.
His son lived down in Southern California. He would always talk about how he wished his son could come up here and live with him in Oakland.
His current love life, however, is more of a source of speculation. Chauncey had recently gotten engaged to his girlfriend, a 41-year-old artist. But before that, his reputation as a ladies' man sparked wild rumors.
When this case started, there were multiple stories that came out in regard to who may be responsible or motive for the murder. Love triangle was one of the issues that popped up.
Anytime you may have a situation where somebody has that kind of a background, from an investigative standpoint, you have to look at every angle of an investigation. Could it be a personal relationship that motivated revenge in some kind?
Former colleague Zima Wyatt recalls an incident that happened shortly before his death.
We were riding to a press conference at City Hall, and I noticed that he was acting real quiet. And he said, "Zima, I feel like someone is following me." Jokingly, really not believing that someone was really following him. First thing I said was, "What woman is trying to kill you now?" He's like, "No, Zima, someone is following me, and I think they're trying to kill me." And the way that he said, "No, Zima," let me know something was wrong, but I just still couldn't fathom that someone was trying to kill him.
Chauncey's family suspects it wasn't a former girlfriend, but someone with a grudge against Chauncey for his hard-hitting journalism.
When you're seeking to get at the truth and you're trying to hold power to account, you have to ask questions that people don't necessarily want to answer. He probably had a list of detractors and people who thought of him unfavorably.
But which one of them hated Chauncey enough to commit murder?
It became very evident that there were other things going on in his life that could have led to violence.
The assassination of Chauncey Bailey wasn't the first time that something of that nature had happened or been associated with the city of Oakland. Back in the early 1970s, one of the first black superintendents, Marcus Foster, was assassinated by the SLA.
And the Black Panther Party was founded in Oakland.
As controversial as the Black Panthers were, their leaders were committed to the people of Oakland. This led to a mistrust between the police and the community.
Oakland, California is a city rich in tradition.
I've traveled this country, and I can tell you that this city is the wealthiest community I've ever seen. And when I say wealthy, I'm not just referring to the riches in terms of your bank account. I'm talking about the riches in terms of culture, in terms of pride.
But in August of 2007, Oakland lost a piece of that legacy when 57-year-old journalist Chauncey Bailey was gunned down.
Chauncey Bailey being killed was a grim reminder to everyone in the community because he was so well known and so well loved.
The entire city was affected by his death. Most of all, his fellow journalists.
We started doing the stories, of course, from the day that he was shot and killed. What does that really mean about what's happening in our country when the foundation of a democracy is the First Amendment?
But despite all of the media attention, detectives still had very little to go on.
Every lead, every rumor that came back was all proved to be not accurate.
There wasn't no jealous husband or nothing like that. You couldn't think of why did it happen.
Investigators hope a thorough examination of the crime scene evidence will create a lead.
There were 2 shotgun shell casings that we located at the scene, and they were in fairly close range to the body. When a shotgun is fired and then it's chambered, a shell casing pops out, falls to the ground. That casing was collected.
It was clear due to the actual gunshot wounds and the damage done and the casings on the scene that a 12-gauge shotgun was used to shoot and execute Mr. Bailey.
One of the first things that an investigator will do is to run those shells through ballistics to see whether or not there have been any other crimes that have been committed pertaining to those shells or that particular type of weapon.
The shotgun shells turn out to be a perfect match for several others found at 2 different murder scenes the previous month.
I was in the middle of a major investigation involving the 2 murders of Odell Roberson and Michael Wills. I had SWAT teams on standby, ready to take this case down the very next morning.
The weapon used had been traced to employees working at a popular local establishment, Your Black Muslim Bakery.
Your Black Muslim Bakery has been operating for decades. They started in multiple locations throughout Oakland, but found a home in North Oakland, which was on the border of Berkeley and Oakland.
That's one of the places where you would stop and get something to eat because of the food was delicious.
And it was a nice place and, beautifully, regally dressed women behind the counter selling things.
I used to get basically a fish sandwich like every Thursday for years because it was economical and it was filling. And they had some of the freshest ingredients.
It isn't a place anyone would normally associate with crime. The store was founded in 1968 by owner Yusuf Bey, who was inspired by the teachings of the Nation of Islam to provide opportunities for young black men.
I remember when I would see the Black Muslims walking down the street with their bow ties and pies and clean and dapper and respectable. It was a source of pride for me as a young African-American man.
They used it as a business opportunity to sell food and beverage, as well as to educate the community, feed the less fortunate individuals, and be a sanctuary for people in the neighborhood who need assistance, but at the same time being able to help themselves.
The Your Black Muslim Bakery, they preached a lot of self-reliance and young black men, if you need a place to go, if you're disenfranchised, you can come here, we'll put you to work.
Over the years, the business had expanded, taking on a different kind of role in the community.
They had a very large footprint with their bakery, multiple residence apartments, as well as facilities where they provided childcare, lunch locations, and other community outreach.
They had a vast security force, and they hired them out to events.
One thing about Muslim security is like if you seen them somewhere, nobody would act up. Their security was tight, period. Folks had respect for it.
Their security forces were around town with their red bow ties. A lot of folks who lived in the neighborhood were glad to have them there because crime really dropped drastically when they had their security people walking the streets.
But the positive impact of Yusuf's vision changed dramatically once he passed away.
Your Black Muslim Bakery was an organization that was involved in multiple illegal activities operating under the protection of a faith-based group. Your Black Muslim Bakery had been the focus of many criminal investigations ranging from statutory rape, torture, kidnap, all the way up into murder.
Everything from fraud to shootings to homicide to vandalism. There was a number of crimes across the spectrum that were taking place there.
In 2005, 6 members of the Black Muslim Bakery were arrested in a faith-related crime spree.
There were some liquor stores in West Oakland that the bakery objected to because they said their part of their religion prohibits the consumption of alcohol. So one evening, a bunch of these guys from the bakery go down there with baseball bats and just destroy all the bottles. There's this poor immigrant guy trying to run a shop there so he can feed his family.
But why would the bakery want to get rid of Chauncey Bailey? The city of Oakland has long been known for its political activism.
Oakland was always the engine that drove causes in the Bay Area. We'll be the first to legalize something, or we'll be the first to push a button.
Yusuf Bey built his store, Your Black Muslim Bakery, on the dream of shaping a better world for Oakland's black community. But his son had different ideas.
Yusuf Bey Sr., he died in the early 2000s. And upon his passing, he left the bakery to 3 or 4 older gentlemen that had been working throughout the years. Antar Bey, who was 20 or 21 years old, he was young, but he wanted to have possession of the bakery. There was a clash between the young and the old. There was a bookkeeper at the bakery by the name of Wajid. He disappeared. Sometime later, his body was discovered buried in a shallow grave in East Oakland. Upon his disappearance, the other older gentlemen decided they wanted nothing more to do with this, which left Antar to run the bakery.
After Antar was killed in a carjacking, his brother Yusuf Bey IV took over and followed in his footsteps. Now police have reason to believe employees of the bakery were involved in the murder of Chauncey Bailey. And on August 3rd, less than 24 hours after Chauncey was shot, they conduct a raid on the bakery's buildings. The raids produced 7 arrests and a cache of evidence.
We found evidence that linked members of the Your Black Muslim Bakery to not only the 2 murders that we were investigating, but other crimes that were under investigation as well.
And in a bizarre twist, the most damning piece of evidence literally lands at investigators' feet.
That's actually pretty normal behavior for a suspect to try to get rid of evidence. Whether it's a drug dealer and he's trying to flush drugs, or it's somebody trying to shred documents. One of the suspects, the idiot, thought that he was going to throw away evidence and threw the gun out the window, and it landed right in front of the police.
The bakery's leader, Yusuf Bey IV, and the man who tossed the gun, 19-year-old Devondre Broussard, are among those taken into custody. Broussard is a handyman at the bakery with a long rap sheet.
Mr. Broussard was a polycriminal. He had multiple arrests for an assortment of crimes. Originally, Mr. Broussard indicated that he was not responsible for the murder of Mr. Bailey, that he had nothing to do with it. He was adamant that he was not responsible, that he didn't, in fact, participate in the murder of Mr. Bailey.
Yusuf Bey IV also claims he's innocent, but says he knows who was responsible.
Yusuf Bey IV, he indicated that others may have done things thinking that they were doing for him at his behest. And he went so far as to basically point me in the direction of who it was, which was Mr. Broussard.
What we have is a crime boss pointing the finger at one of his underlings. And as an investigator, you don't want to let anybody off the hook, big fish or little fish.
Mr. Broussard indicated he wanted to speak to Yusuf Bey IV alone for just a few minutes, and then after that, he would tell us the truth.
Detectives put Yusuf and Broussard in the same room together. The unconventional move quickly pays off.
We stepped out of the room. I think I checked my watch. I think I gave them 4 minutes.
So the police leave Devondre and Yusuf in a room together. And the police come back, and all of a sudden, Devondre is singing a different tune.
Mr. Broussard proceeded to tell me that he was, in fact, the shooter of Mr. Bailey. He said he did it because Mr. Bailey was going to write something about the bakery.
Investigative journalism has a lot in common with what police do. Sometimes their work can actually lead to the solving of a case.
The Center for Investigative Reporting, the nation's first nonprofit journalism organization, got its beginnings in Oakland.
They focus on aspects of the investigation that the police just didn't have the resources to follow up on.
The city of Oakland is still reeling from the murder of well-respected journalist Chauncey Bailey. And on August 8th, 2007, they show up to pay their last respects.
The service was huge. It looked like everybody in Oakland was there. That was a testament of what Chauncey meant to people.
Chauncey was committed to the city of Oakland, and in particular the Black community. He reported on the good things that Oakland
that helped Oakland and the bad things that were destroying Oakland.
His death didn't just devastate people, it took something away from us.
Among the mourners who fill St. Benedict's Church in East Oakland is publisher Paul Cobb, who vows to continue Chauncey's work investigating your Black Muslim bakery.
This community will know what Chauncey Bailey and I were working on.
An employee of the bakery, 19-year-old Devondre Broussard, has been held without bond after confessing to the crime. Broussard claims he acted alone, killing Chauncey to stop him from finishing a scathing article about the bakery and its patriarch, Yusuf Bey.
Yusuf Bey, the senior, had been charged with inappropriate conduct with young women for rape. The noose was tightening around that empire, and Chauncey had reported on this. Yusuf Bey, he had gotten cancer and ultimately died before going through the trial. But his son, Yusuf Bey IV, always hated Chauncey for reporting on those stories.
Although they can't prove it yet, Chauncey's colleagues believe Yusuf Bey IV ordered Broussard to carry out the hit.
You had newspaper people, you had TV people, you had radio people, all coming together.
We formed the Chauncey Bailey Project. I was one of the 2 real working reporters on the project. Well, for me, from the morning that he was assassinated,
they took it upon themselves to actually continue the investigation and make sure that Chauncey Bailey's murder was not in vain and that all people responsible were held accountable.
That task becomes more difficult when Broussard's lawyers instruct him to withdraw his statement, claiming his confession was coerced by Sergeant Longmire of the Oakland Police.
First, Broussard is denying this murder. Then they let Bey come in, have a conversation with him. And then after the conversation, Broussard admits to the murder. But they don't record it.
The media felt that there was something not right about all of it. They felt that something was afoot. So they started looking and creating.
Now, I don't personally think that Longmire was dirty, but I think that he left himself open to criticism. There was a feeling that he was sort of too close to Bey.
It comes out that Sergeant Longmire had known Yusuf Bey IV for 2 years and cultivated a personal relationship with him. Some believe it is a conflict of interest that allowed Bey to evade arrest.
there was one good, strong voice in the Oakland Police Department that kept saying to the command staff, that bakery is a criminal enterprise and we need to do something about it. But his ability to establish a rapport with people that were really difficult to communicate with was used against him.
OPD homicide were the darlings of the media. A short time later, when they found out that Yusuf Bey IV was not being charged, we became the black sheep.
The Oakland Police Department faces even sharper criticism when the Chauncey Bailey Project uncovers a shocking revelation about the raid on the bakery.
It was initially planned for a day or two before Mr. Bailey's murder.
The morning of August 2nd, when Chauncey Bailey was murdered, our homicide section was in the middle of investigating multiple murders involving the Your Black Muslim Bakery.
The police and SWAT teams delayed it because there were a couple people who were on a camping trip.
The two guys who were supposed to be leading this task force to shut down the bakery had gone up to the Sierras to go camping and fishing, and they were a little bit late coming back, so they called the then chief of police and said, hey, we're not going to be able to make it for this raid. Can you postpone it for a day or two? And guess what happened the next day because the raid didn't take place? They shot and killed Chauncey Bailey. Now, the police department command staff was in a very embarrassing situation. They could have prevented this if they had just done their police duty.
To combat the negative press, Police Chief Wayne Tucker takes the highly unusual step of imposing a gag order. The ensuing controversy causes Chauncey's murder investigation to grind to a halt
There were 3 internal investigations, 1 DOJ investigation, and 1 federal institution that had made some inquiries on this. So it received so much incredible scrutiny.
I truly believe there was paralysis by analysis when it came to this investigation.
Then in June of 2008, the Chauncey Bailey Project releases a video they've obtained, which seems to finally prove Yusuf Bey IV was involved.
So there's a key moment in the investigation when we got a hold of this footage of them being interviewed.
We were able to see the videotape of Yusuf Bey and 2 of his compatriots, not realizing that everything was being recorded.
So I think the one that they used.
Yusuf Bey was bragging about the crime, essentially. And he wasn't saying, I'm the one who was instrumental behind it, I ordered it. And that's what I was waiting for, is to hear something like that.
That's no different than any street hood bragging about a murder that he heard about or that he saw. So you don't have enough material there to charge or to move forward with Mr. Bey.
April 2009. For more than a year, the investigation into Chauncey Bailey's murder has stalled due to controversy surrounding the Oakland Police Department. But now the primary suspect, Devondre Broussard, suddenly changes his mind again. He's ready to make a deal with prosecutors.
So much of this has to do with Devondre flipping, going from denial to taking a fall for his leader, to realizing that he was the sucker. He wasn't a soldier, as Bey used to call him, but rather that he was a dupe. And that he should not go down for Yusuf Bey when it was Yusuf Bey who was the mastermind of this.
Facing life in prison, Broussard agrees to plead guilty and testify against his employer, Yusuf Bey IV. In April, he goes before the grand jury and tells them about the order to kill Chauncey Bailey.
He had a history of writing negative articles about members, all the way up to the father and founder of the Your Block Muslim Bakery.
But what caught the eye of the Black Muslim Bakery folks was a story that he was doing on the finances of the bakery.
One of the big concerns for Yusuf Bey IV was that the probate court was going to hear and learn about some things that would cause the probate judge to strip the bakery away from Yusuf Bey IV.
Yusuf Bey IV was under the impression that either the story had not been written and he was going to prevent its being reported, or that it was only in Chauncey Bailey's head and that by killing the man that he would kill the story.
Broussard says Bey planned the shooting, selecting him and getaway driver Antoine Mackey for the job.
Bey manipulated him and the shooter by showing them videotape of Chauncey Bailey at his father's funeral. And then he gave Broussard the shotgun, and these guys are loyal soldiers, so you know they're going to do anything for him.
On August 2nd, Broussard and Mackey stalked Chauncey Bailey on his way to work, waiting for the right moment to strike.
They saw Chauncey Bailey come from his house, and the plan was to execute him right there. Unfortunately, they were not able to shoot him because he got onto an AC Transit bus. They then followed the bus to downtown Oakland and saw him get off and go into the McDonald's. After he came out the McDonald's, they saw their opportunity to actually execute him.
Chauncey's walking along, a white van with no plates, comes roaring up. Devondre Broussard jumps out with a shotgun and drops him. Hits him twice. He falls. Devondre sprints back to the van being driven by Mackey. For some reason or another, either he's been told to go back there and finish him off, or he decides to do it. Jogs back over to Chauncey's fallen body and unloads another couple of shells into his head. Then they speed away.
On April 29, 2009, the grand jury indicts Yusuf Bey IV for ordering the murders of 3 men: Chauncey Bailey, Odell Robertson, and Michael Wills. Antoine Mackey is also charged, and on March 21, 2011, both he and Bey stand trial in Alameda County.
The trial was pretty sensational. I had dozens of news crews and newspaper folk and everybody else and their brother-in-law.
Along with Broussard's damning testimony, prosecutors showed the jury a tape of Yusuf Bey IV joking about Chauncey's death.
That was really important evidence because he knew explicitly what happened. It had been reported to him hours or an hour after Devondre had executed him on his orders.
Sergeant Derwin Longmire also testifies about his controversial decision to leave Bey alone in an interview room with Broussard.
We stepped out of the room. I think I checked my watch. I think I gave them 4 minutes. I stood right outside the door, opened the door. They asked me, they both held up their hand and asked me if they could have just a few more minutes. So we gave them 2 more minutes, came back into the room and said, all right, let's get to it. And Mr. Broussard proceeded to tell me that he was in fact the shooter of Mr. Bailey.
Longmire says his decision was meant to get to the truth.
He was said to be the best guy to be able to get information out of people who didn't want to talk.
The defense attempts to discredit Broussard's testimony, calling him a liar who'd already changed his story several times.
If they can find something that will discredit somebody as far as their character or their credibility or their integrity in some way, they'll use anything and everything that they can against the other person.
Fortunately for justice, the Alameda County District Attorney had a great prosecutor in Melissa Crum who brought the case home.
The Yusuf Bey IV was convicted of all 3 murders.
Antoine Mackey is also convicted. Both he and Bey received consecutive life sentences with no chance for parole. For his role, Broussard receives 25 years. The city of Oakland was forever changed by the murder of Chauncey Bailey. Not only because he is missed, but because his case ultimately brought about the kind of reform he fought for during his career.
If you fast forward to present day, Oakland has been deemed one of the safest cities around. We have been nationally recognized as far as dropping our violence rate.
I think Chauncey was one of those unsung heroes that people didn't get what he was attempting to do until after he was murdered.
Journalism can be a risky business, but we do it because we love it and because we believe in the role that journalism plays in our society and in our democracy. Chauncey didn't deserve to be shot down in the street for trying to do his job.
Chauncey Bailey's death should not be in vain, but rather a time when we can remember that a free press is in fact the very foundation of a democracy.